Welcome to KPod, the podcast about Korean Americans in arts and culture. I'm Catherine Hong, a writer and editor.
And I'm Juliana Sohn, a photographer.
Today we're thrilled to interview artist and graphic designer Ji Lee in his studio in Brooklyn. Born in Korea and raised in Brazil, Ji is one of the most influential designers working in the country today. He is a creative director at Facebook, where he's worked since 2011. Previously, he worked at Google Creative Lab, Droga 5, and Saatchi & Saatchi. But it's his wide range of witty and subversive personal projects that have won him the adoration of the design world. Whether he's working with typography, miniatures, videos, or found images, he's constantly challenging the way we see the world and communicate with each other. If you live in New York City, you might remember something he did called the Bubble Project, where he created thousands of cartoon speech bubble stickers and stuck them on advertisements all over the city. He also helped create the Instagram phenomenon Drawing for My Grandchildren, which features the artwork of his 76-year-old father. We have so many questions for you, Ji. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I will start. I know that you lived in Korea and then moved to Brazil and then New York. Can you tell me about what life like was in Korea early on?
Yes, I was born in Seoul, Korea. Both of my parents were high school teachers. They were both artistic. My mom always wrote. My dad was interested in becoming a singer, but also had talent for drawing. Growing up in Korea, I grew up in a typical sort of a middle class. Both of my parents were being teacher. Lived in a neighborhood called Hwagokdong, which I think is sort of far from the center. There were hills and mountains where I used to live. And I had a very typical, normal childhood. My life completely changed when we immigrated from Korea to Brazil. My grandfather, from my mother's side, had the idea of first immigrating. So my mother's family is from North Korea, and they fled during the Korean War to the south. My grandfather was an adventurous man. He always trying to try new things. And I think he heard from a friend that there was an opportunity for immigrants in Brazil. And at the time, we're talking about early 70s, mid 70s, a lot of Koreans, I think, ended up going to United States. But it was, I think, not as easy to immigrate to the States. So I don't know, I have to ask my mom about specifically why we went to Brazil. But my grandfather, who has 7 children, took his single children first, the 4 of them. And then a few years later, once they established themselves in Brazil, invited the rest of the family. So in 1981, we followed his footstep, and my family moved from Korea to Brazil.
So your parents were married and had kids, but decided to follow your grandfather.
Yes, because early 80s in Korea was still, Korea was still considered a poor country. With the education being focused, I think they wanted to try something new. They felt that their lives were limited in Korea at the time, economically and education-wise. And that's when we decided to move to Brazil.
And what kind of community was there in terms of Koreans? Was there any existing?
Oh, yeah. At the time, there was a fairly significant community of Koreans. There were churches and restaurants. It was not nearly like the Korean Americans, but we could go to Korean restaurants and we could buy. There was a Korean grocery stores and churches. I still remember the first few days in Brazil. It really was like landing in a different planet because at that point in my life in Korea, I had never seen a Western person in real life. I never tasted Western food. Mm-hmm. The only point of contact of Western culture for me was watching American TV shows like A $6 Million Man or Wonder Woman and stuff like that. And the American products like Spam and the gums and because of the GI influence in Korea, those products were like really coveted. So we had this fantasy about the American and Western culture, but I never seen a Western person. So landing in Brazil for the first time, and it really was like going to a different planet.
What sort of work do the Koreans do there at the time, and what sort of work did your family end up doing?
At the time, and I think it's still the case, most of the Koreans in Brazil were doing retail business specifically related to fashion. So I think they follow the footsteps of the Jewish community in Brazil, who for many years, they came earlier than Koreans, and they started with the garment business, selling textiles and manufacturing clothing. So most of the Koreans at the time were doing that. So they had Jewish landlords and, making clothing and selling. And that's how my grandparents started. They went to Brazil, and my grandfather probably had a few $1,000s in his pocket and had a sewing machine. And when they landed in Brazil, they had no money to start a new business. So what they did was they go to a Korean store, buy a bunch of Korean clothing they made, and what they call 보따리 장사, which is a selling through big bags. So they'll take a big bag full of clothes, they take a bus, go far away, and then put it outside on the street and start selling without speaking much Portuguese. And that's how they started their business. When my parents went, they were not as drastic of taking a bus, but they still 보따리 장사, which is they went to the store by store and bought wholesale clothing, and they went to the retail store with a small profit. That's how they started.
That's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about the connection with the garmentos and how immigrants start with that.
Right.
Did your parents and your family, they eventually save up money to have a brick and mortar store?
Yeah, we had a very comfortable life. Typical middle class. We're not rich, but we went to good school, and eventually my parents ended up manufacturing clothing. But they were not really never business people. They were more, teachers and artist type. So they're successful enough for us to have a comfortable life. Yeah, that's what our life. We had a very typical Brazilian Korean immigration life.
Jumping ahead a little further, what were you like in high school? What was that experience like for you in Brazil?
It was an amazing experience to go to Brazil. Brazilians are very nice people in general. They're very welcoming, and I adapted really quickly. I was 10, still early, so I went and played soccer with the local boys. I went to a Catholic school in Brazil, so I had to learn things very quickly. The language was still a barrier, and I think that had a tremendous impact to what I still do today, is to how to effectively communicate, how to come to the essence of things. Because I was limited in communicating verbally, so I had to find different ways to communicate. It was, for me, a way to get out of the situation or survive in that first years. But the process was very smooth for me. And actually, in Brazil, we benefited, as a Korean Brazilian, benefited because of a huge Japanese population that went there many, many years ago. I think there's, 4 or 5 generations of Japanese. So the fact that they went there first and established themselves, people were familiar with the Asian culture, all those things helped. But there was still a little bit of, poking fun at Asian people. Like they would, pull their eyes and, make fun of the Asian folks. And they called us all Japanese, Japonese, right? Because that's how Brazilians know what Asian. Here is maybe Chinese, but there is Japanese.
So I am fascinated because Korea is so structured, very confusion society, and then you go from that to Brazil, which is has a reputation for being incredibly emotive and emotional and very free. So did you notice a difference?
Oh yeah. Well, I was 10, so in Korea. I don't remember being in a very strict environment. I think both my parents were very liberal. They were very open-minded for being Korean at the generation. So I never felt the Korea society at the time, at my age, was very strict. But maybe if I stayed a little bit longer and going to high school, maybe I felt a little bit more the pressure. But my life in Brazil, I completely assimilated to becoming a Brazilian. And I dated Brazilian girls. I never dated Korean folks. My best friends were Brazilian. I traveled with Brazilian. So there was a little bit of the identity conflict for me, because my mom always told me, okay, it's okay for you to date a Brazilian, but in the end, you have to marry a Korean woman. I said, yes, yeah, whatever.
So can you describe, how did you decide to go to college in New York?
So I was always interested in art and drawing, probably because of the influence of my parents. And I just knew from early on, I want to be an artist. With that intent, when I graduated from high school, my parents were, they were well off enough to send me to New York to study in art school. The tuitions were very expensive, But at the time, my parents had a good store and they were doing okay, so they felt confident that they could pay for the tuition. So that's when I applied for a bunch of school, Pratt, SVA, and Parsons, and I got accepted in all of them. And that's how I came to New York. That was 1991.
I feel like you are one of these students that graduated almost like fully formed in your visual identity as a designer, and like you got snatched up right like as your senior show launched. Can you tell us about that? I mean, I feel like your career has been like on a trajectory ever since college.
When I came to Parsons, it was like heaven for me because I just did things that I was interested because it was all about art and creativity. So it didn't feel like work to me. I would stay up every night and doing those projects. It was a fun and joy just to work on those things. I did that for 4 years, and it was the best time. In the end, I had a good portfolio, and when there was a Parsons senior show. When you have a little booth and every student put their work out there and put a little bit of business card and you hope get hired. And I already had a job that I had already accepted by a corporate design studio called Frankfurt Baukein, which doesn't exist anymore. But Stefan Zagmeister, who at the time was already a famous graphic designer, came to my show and he liked my work, and he gave me his business card, asked me to come by to his studio. He had a small studio on the 13th Street on the west side, and he offered me a job, which was a huge honor because, again, he was a really famous guy. But I had already accepted the job at Frankfurt Baukein, and I was in conflict, and I ended up, saying no, thank you, because I already have a job. But he ended up becoming my mentor. From that point, we still are friends, and I still come to talk to him from time to time. I just met him last week for dinner.
Well, I'm curious, how did you decide that graphic design was what you want to focus on as opposed to drawing or painting?
It's a good question because, again, I wanted to become a fine artist. So I ended up going to fine art my second year of Parsons. First year, you did the foundation year, like everybody does the same thing. And second year, you decide your major. And I went into fine arts. And I didn't really enjoy the program that much because it was very theoretical. You do, make a painting and then bring it, and you spend like 4 hours theorizing about the painting, about art history and the concept. And I was more interested in making stuff. And many of the professors were frustrated artists and just like theorizing about stuff. And I wasn't really into that stuff. And then after the first semester, I decided to switch my major. I just didn't know what to do. And then I saw fashion is really strong, but I didn't want to go to the fashion department. And they were like product design, graphic design. And I liked what the graphic design students were doing because it felt still creative, but they were learning a trade, something that they could find a job with. So I decided I should go into graphic design. And I loved it from the moment I went to graphic design, because it was very artistic, it was very creative, but it was very practical. There was no like a theorizing bullshit, It was all about, technique and typography and learning specific things. And I love the combination of creativity and practicality.
So I think it's really interesting that you started out fine art, you moved to graphic design, and knowing a little bit about your work history, it feels like you don't really fit comfortably in graphic design either, because it's very limiting for the kind of work you do. And I'm not sure if Tibor Kalman felt some of the same restraints, but I feel like he was able to comfortably inhabit that design space and express himself. But I feel like you're almost like busting to like move out of that. And I see that in like the Bubble Project and your miniatures. And it's almost like you have so many ideas, and it almost it can't be defined and limited by graphic design. And I wanted to ask you about how you work on your personal projects.
Well, after about 2 years of doing graphic design, I really wanted to get into advertising because I grew up in Brazil watching some of the great commercials. Brazil is really famous for their TV campaigns. And I wanted to do stuff like that because there's a culture defining thing. So I wanted to get into advertising. I just didn't know how to because I had no portfolio with ad and I didn't know anybody. And it's funny how things happen in life when you put a thought into the universe and how the things take care of itself sometimes. So when I was a junior at Parson, it was the time that they first introduced the whole computer lab. I was transitioning from the mechanical to the computer in my times at Parson. I sound very old saying that, but it's true. In the computer lab, they introduced a class for 3D design, and there was a program called Adobe Dimension. And it was a 3D program, very crude 3D program, the first probably by Adobe. And I was experimenting with it, and there was a tool that you could use to revolve on a two-dimensional thing. So you can make let's say, a square, and you can revolve that thing to become like a three-dimensional object. And I did that with object, but I tried that also with letters. Oh, I could maybe try to create a 3D alphabet with it. And I ended up revolving these letters and made the 26 letters that became 3D, and I called it Universe Revolve because I used the font called Universe. And then I had my portfolio with that 3D alphabet thing, and then I got a job at a small design studio called Design Writing Research by, at the time, very famous designer, Abbott Miller.
And this was junior year?
Yes, so I got an internship there. And he liked the 3D alphabet. At the time, he was just about to publish a small book called Dimensional Typography. So he included a spread in there.
That's amazing. As a junior in college.
It was probably one of the biggest opportunity for me. But it was a small, it wasn't like a big book. It was a very niche, small book that was probably well known in the design community. So somehow an editor or writer in the New York Times saw that book. And at the time, they were publishing a New York Times Sunday magazine dedicated to technology. And she got in touch with me and asked me if she could use that font for their upcoming magazine as like a feature font throughout a 10-page article. Of course, I was thrilled. That came out, and at the same time, so it's all about timing, It's just really amazing how things happen. So at the time, Saatchi & Saatchi, a huge global agency, was organizing a thing called the Innovation Communication Award for the first time. So their thing was they wanted to give this important award to ideas that innovated in the field of communication. And they invited many famous judges like Laurie Anderson and Buzz Aldrin, like some of the big names. Laurie Anderson happened to read that New York Times article and saw the font. Mm-hmm. And she got in touch with the Saatchi people and say, you guys should consider inviting him to participate in this award. Wow. So I got an email from Saatchi. I said, hey, we're doing this thing. Do you want to participate? I said, of course. So I spent like 2 weeks putting together, like this really good proposal, and I submitted it. And I ended up, meeting all the Saatchi people. I met Laurie Anderson. I still remember going to their gala dinner with all the 10 finalists. So I ended up becoming one of the 10 finalists.
Amazing.
So that's small things, like I had an interview with Design, Writing Research, got published in a tiny book. And then the New York Times person reads this. And then like the Saatchi, Laurie Anderson, just one thing led to another. And then ended up meeting the worldwide creative officer at Saatchi. And he asked me to show my portfolio. And again, like my portfolio was a design portfolio. I had no ads piece. And then he offered me a job as a junior art director. My salary got doubled. I got my own office. And that's how I got into advertising.
Wow.
And that's the thread in my career, that everything that happened was because of personal project. Mm-hmm. All the jobs, all the opportunities, this interview is all because of personal project. And my mission in life is to share my story, that this personal project can be transformational. And it's not because of me. I believe that anyone with passion and idea through technology can change their life if they just focused on personal project and sharing more about it.
Well, which takes us nicely to the Bubble Project, which we've mentioned, but I don't think we've explained. And it really is a nice story because you were working in advertising at that time or getting frustrated with advertising. Is that right?
Your luster with advertising was wearing off at that point.
So let's backtrack a little bit. So I got into Saatchi, and it was I still remember getting that job and getting my first business card that says Saatchi and Saatchi Art Director and having my fancy office. I thought this was like the turning point in my career. I'm gonna do amazing work. I'm gonna win awards. I'm gonna be famous. I was so excited. And little by little, I realized that what I thought was going to be a really creative environment was really the exact opposite. And I think we're at the height of the political correctness at the time. It was the 90s. You couldn't do anything mildly offensive or provocative. Every ideas that were moving forward were tested. And brands in general, they didn't want to take any risks. They wanted to do things that they knew were safe, and they just wanted to do formulaic stuff. And I wasn't interested in doing anything just formulaic. I just wanted to try a new thing and be creative, but all my ideas just would die in the process. I'll give you an example of what the work was like. So one of the client was General Mills, a huge corporation that does all kinds of food. And one of their most iconic product is Cheerios. We got a brief from the client that said, we want to communicate that Cheerio comes in 5 different flavors. And they wanted to put that into a billboard and print ad, which is a challenging brief to start with because you're talking about 5 products in one ad. But, a copywriter partner and I, we thought about it and we decided to show the 5 packages. And the line was, only their holes taste the same. Because for those who don't know what Cheerios is, it's shaped like donuts. So there's a hole in there. And we presented that idea to the client and everybody started laughing. Oh, this is so clever. It's so funny. It's like, we love it. And we were just, my partner and I, we looked at each other and said, wow, this is going really well. We loved it. It's like, maybe we're going to finally ship something. And so, surely enough, one of the clients raised the hand and said, well, wait a minute. We never talk about taste. We talk about flavors in our corporate language. That's not how we talk about a product. We talk about flavors. So we started talking, okay, only their holes have the same flavor. It just doesn't
have a good
writing. Exactly. It's poorly written. So for 40 minutes, we started discussing the difference between taste and flavor. And in the end, everybody was so sick and tired, they killed the idea. And that was like a good example of what happened every day. And it just pains me to think about it because I was this ambitious, excited, junior art director, wanted to change the world through advertising. And I got defeated every single day. And at one point, after 3 years, I just gave up. So what I did for probably that 8 month, I went to work like around 11 o'clock. I did maybe like a few meetings, 40 minutes. And I locked myself into my office and I play online chess the whole time.
Oh my God.
And it was not my work, right? Because nobody bothered me. But I was deeply frustrated because I was making stuff when I was at Parsons. I was, for 3 years, I wasn't making anything.
Right, so in that 3 years, did you not have any personal projects?
No, because I was so focused on doing agency work because I really wanted to ship stuff there. I wanted to make stuff and build my portfolio there.
So then how do you think this idea of where did it come from?
And so I actually have to thank General Mills a lot because the frustration I felt through them really motivated to do stuff. So one of the other project was, they wanted to promote healthy eating to their consumers, and they also wanted to help parents and children communicate better about healthy eating. That was their brief. So it's a good brief. It's not like product focused. It was about behavior focused.
Yeah.
And it's positive and social. So, one of the ideas that I came up with was, many of the family, the parents are so busy, they only see each other like in the morning and the evening, and they use the fridge as a mean of communication, right? They put messages there or photos, like don't forget to eat the salad in the fridge and so on. So I came up with that insight, and I said, oh, maybe we can create like a speech bubble magnet. So when you put your photo of because there are photos of the family there, and you can put that speech bubble magnet on top of the photo, and then mom could tell, hey, Junior, make sure you eat the,
In the box of Cheerios. It's like the little toy.
yeah, they could do that, or they could, exactly, as a little souvenir or like a little merchandise. So we presented that idea, and of course they killed it. Just like everything else, right? For so many reasons, I don't know. But also, what was getting frustrating to me as a person who worked in advertising was to see the kind of ads that were getting produced from the agency. They were all shitty, unintelligent, boring ads that you were just used to seeing every day. And as a resident in New York, to see these horrible ads everywhere, right? In bus stops and billboards and subway, they were just plastered. And New York has no regulations of advertising. Like in certain cities in Europe, there are strict regulations because they're considered visual pollution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's no regulation. So anybody can just post stuff. And just to see this visual pollution just everywhere, it was very frustrating because I felt I was a part of the machine that produced this crap. And I wanted to do something about it. So I made the connection of that speech bubble thing to the ads that I see on the street. And I said, well, I'm gonna make something. Because the one thing that when you work in a company, especially like in a big company, in an ad agency, for an idea to get produced, like there are dozens of people get involved in producing one idea. So you forget that you can actually make some stuff by yourself because you get so used to brainwashed in that production process. So I think I was also sort of got too used to that system, and I got so frustrated. I just wanted to make stuff. So that was the sort of the turning point when all my egg got killed, and then I saw the speech bubble thing, and then I just made the connection. I'm just gonna make this speech bubble myself, and I spent $3,000 and went to a press in Chinatown, and I made 10,000 stickers. I made two sizes, small and one large. And whenever I went, I carried a bag and I placed these stickers all over New York City, bus stop and telephone booth and wall postings.
So what kind of ads and images did you put these stickers on?
Everywhere. It was anything that had a face on it.
And did you give some to friends and colleagues so that you had help, or did you do it all by yourself?
I was happy to give it away, but I don't think anybody wanted to do it because it is, a vandalism. It's illegal. Mm-hmm. So I think it took certain amount of courage to do it, and I didn't mind. I was young and I was fearless, and I actually enjoyed doing something a little bit
transgressive,
against your own agency, like your own industry.
You just gave me the thrill. It was like the jumping the wall a little bit, like when parents say don't play with fire. Like I knew it wasn't too serious, like I wasn't harming anybody. I wasn't doing like anything permanent. It was stickers that that could remove. So I really felt the excitement. I'll put some Rage Against the Machine song in my Walkman. Okay, it was a CD player at the time, and then I go around and then putting the stickers. I felt like I was like being this revolutionary guy.
Yeah. And when did you notice people starting to write in the bubbles? Was it immediate? And
it was immediate. And the only rule that I had that I would not never write anything inside. I would just put it and let people write. But it was immediate because New York is very much a place where people walk around, and it's during the summertime. And it's an invitation, like you see the empty bubble, you have to do something, right? And it was also for me an instant therapy because, for every ad that I got killed in the agency, I just didn't give a damn anymore. I would just go out and create 300 new ads. And it was so therapeutic because like by putting that ad, I could just instantly transform the meaning of the ad. And it was so much fun because it was just like I would just put something and go back and find something written. I'd just take photos. I would spend hours and hours, and I put it in the subway trains, and I would just go between the subway trains with, listen to the heavy metal music. It was just like, I was having a blast. And then I made the project open source. So I put a template of the sticker so people can download it and they can print it and encourage people to do it. Yeah. Because I wanted, there are two reasons. One is I wanted more people to do it.
Yeah.
And second reason was I didn't want to be blamed for doing this illegal thing. Because I can always say, I didn't do that, right? And actually, it helped me because I got an email from the media company, like Van Wagner, like the lawyer wrote to me with a very threatening, really scary email. I was like, we're going to prosecute you or blah, blah, blah.
Desecrating our.
Right? And I had to talk to the lawyer. And I said, well, I didn't do it because, like I put this template and people do it themselves. You can see it for yourself. There are 1,000 people doing it. So I didn't do it. So I'm sorry. I stopped doing it, but other people are doing that. And then I never got another email from that.
And they didn't make you take the
They
sign
didn't take,
down or anything?
no. They didn't.
So one of my favorite Instagram feeds is drawings for my grandchildren. And I remember following it early on and then realizing that he was coming to New York and he must have been coming to visit you because of Astro, or I'm not sure why he was in town a few years ago. And I remember trying to get some photo editors interested in covering him. And that site must have been one of the biggest viral videos that you made. Can you talk about that project?
Yeah, sure. After the Bubble Project, I dedicated my life to focus on personal project, regardless if I had a great job or not. Because I think there's something about the personal project that people connect in a much deeper level. Because most of the project we do professionally, for the most part, we're trying to sell something. And as much ingenious and creative they can be, I think people know, in the end of the day, you're servicing a corporation. And I think when people see a personal project, they know there is no financial intent. It's mostly because of a personal passion, and there's certain purity in this project. And I think people connect to this project on a deeper personal level. That's why they're more valued and they're timeless. So I did a lot of personal projects after that, and I went around the world giving talk about the transformative power personal project. But it was always about working on my ideas and, specifically objects or a typography thing. So the drawing for my grandchildren happened almost by accident because the subject in the case is a person, right? It's not like a thing, a book or an object. After I came to New York, my parents and my sisters stayed in Brazil, and they continued to do their business. My sister got married and had children. And my parents, about 7 years ago, they retired from their work. But my mom started a new job teaching Korean international students in Sao Paulo. But my father retired, and all of a sudden he had no work to do. And his daily activity was to take care of his two grandkids, Arthur and Alan, my sister's two kids. So their mom would go to work, and my father would drive them to school and then pick them up and then spend the afternoon with them. They would have lunch together. So he loved his grandkids, and he was very happy being active with them. By the time that they were, I think, 6 or 5, my sister's husband had the opportunity in Korea, so they decided to move. Brazil was going through a very difficult time. So a lot of business closed, and my sister was going through hard times. So they ended up moving back to Korea. But my parents decided to stay because my mom still had a job. They didn't know what to do moving back to Korea. But then with that, my dad lost his daily activity and the joy of spending time with his grandkids. And he also had gone through illness and shingles, which is a very, very painful thing. Like he had huge rashes in his body, and he never recovered from that illness, and he still has chronic pain. So he became very passive, and the family started to worry about him. So I was starting to think, well, what can we do to encourage him to be a little bit more active? And then I remember, as a child, my father used to be really good at drawing, although he never studied art and never went to art school. When he went traveling with his class, like in the summer camp, instead of buying a postcard, he would buy little blank piece of paper and draw something and then send it to us.
That's
And
fantastic.
yeah, and I remember as a young child being impressed with his drawing skills. He had a very minimal pen and ink, like almost like a cartoon style, very designy style. And I knew he was talented. And so I suggested he should draw again. And I suggested that he should post it on Instagram because then, we can all see, right? And because I work at Facebook and I work at Instagram, I knew the tool. So it would be easy for me to talk to my mom about it. And my father is completely, ignorant about technology. He never used Google in his life. He never had an email. He used phones to make phone calls only. But my mom was opposite because he was very curious. He had, she used Facebook and Instagram and, Google all the time. So I talked to my mom and we agreed that he would draw something. My mom would take a photo and then put it onto Instagram account. And my father was very annoyed about the whole thing. It's like, why should I draw? What is it? Why should I put it on Instagram? So it was very hard to convince him, but so my mom basically forced him, right? She's like, okay, you're gonna just draw something. So it was a fight.
This is so like such a Korean story.
Yeah, it's a very. And although my mom was very savvy, it was very hard to teach her how to properly take a photo and crop it properly and use the filters. So it was going like this for maybe 6 months. Like I was getting on a call, talking to my mom, and we were screaming at each other because she's losing the patience.
Slave driving them. Produce.
I would just tell him, like, you can just draw anything. Draw garbage can. You can still see the garbage can. There's a garbage can. So what my mom would do, she would go outside and take photos of things that she saw and then put it in front of him and then force him to draw. And then he would draw and then she would take photos and so on. And we said, like, can you please draw at least one thing a day? But obviously that didn't work, and it became like one every 2 days and one every week. And we were almost giving up because it was so painful. Like everybody was pissed off, right? So we were almost giving up about this project. When my son Astro was born 4 years ago, and my mom and dad came to meet him for the first time. So he spent about 2 weeks with us. And one evening, we were eating and, with a few glasses of sake, and he said, well, I wonder what Astro will become when he grows up. And I just asked why. I said, well, because I'm not going to be around anymore. It was a very practical conversation. It was the first time that it hit me that, wow, yes, he's 76. Then it just, suddenly hit me. Oh, that's so true. And then I started to think about my grandparents. From my mom's side, I still have good memories because, he had a long life and I know who he was. But I don't know what he was when he was young. There's only like a casual oral history that my mom or my uncle told me. But I don't know anything about my father's side, my paternal grandfather. And I thought, wow, I didn't want this to be a case for Astro, right? I wanted Astro to know what kind of grandfather he had. So it made me sad to think about this prospect. So I started to problem solve. It's a very creative process. Like you're getting a brief from your client, right? The brief is your father is 74, your child is just got born. How can we make sure that when your son grows up, he'll know more about his grandfather? That was a brief. So it was a creative problem solving for me. And then I just thought about the Instagram project that was not going well. And all of a sudden I had the thought, what if you drew for your grandchildren? For Arthur and Alan, who is far away in Korea. So it would be a good way for you to draw something for them so they can follow the drawings, they can see what's going on in Brazil. And then for Astro, when he grows up, he can see all the things he did.
How did the account take off the way it did?
It just took a while. And, our purpose wasn't to make this big or go viral, because we just saw the value of doing this for Arthur and Alan, and then for posterity.
But also for your father's
Astro.
mental health as well.
Absolutely, right? But what changed was, and it was a long process, now I had to teach my father how to use Instagram, which is in itself is a whole project.
But he was much more receptive now.
That's the difference. He was more receptive, he wanted to learn. And then you can see drawing with his new purpose. And I think the first drawing he did was a draw Astro's toy, and which is a very beautiful drawing. And then he drew a bunch of things he saw in New York, like the water tower and the MoMA shopping bag.
Oh, how iconic.
Yeah, and that's still one of my favorite drawings. That was really the turning point. So he went on like this for 6-8 months or maybe longer, maybe a year or so. And maybe at the time he had 1,000 followers, which we thought it was a great number of followers. In 2017 or 2015, and I remember for a month I wanted to tell my dad's story on Facebook, but it was hard because I was in New York and they were there. So I thought, okay, next time I go to Brazil, I'm going to interview him and make a video. And then I'm going to post that on Facebook because I knew this is a great story that a lot of people are going to enjoy this. So I'm going to tell stories in stills as a progressive story. So I did this big Photoshop file with like 100 layers, starting with, hi, I am Ji Lee. I am a designer in New York. That will be one panel. And the next panel will be, this is my grumpy 76-year-old father. The third panel will be, he lives in Brazil. And the fourth panel will be, his daily activity is to take care of his 2 grandchildren. His Arthur and Alan. So it'll be like this. You'll be seeing the progression of the story, and then I could tell the whole story in about 100 different vertical panel. So what I did was I took all those stills and then I put it into one video and I shared it on Facebook. And I thought it would be good video because it's a mobile optimized video. It's a vertical format. There's no voiceover. It's all visual. And I used emojis and it was entertaining. And I shared it. And when I woke up, it had gone viral already because 1,000 people had seen it. They were starting sharing. There was hundreds of comments. And it follows a typical viral pattern. And then you start getting emails from newspapers and BBC and Guardian, the New York Post, and Good Morning America. And it just goes on and on and on. And it just went viral. That was the turning point. And that video, I think, now has nearly 7 million views on Facebook.
What did your parents think? Were they all of a sudden celebrities in their hometown?
Absolutely, because they were featured in some of the biggest Brazilian news. Obviously, the Korean, Brazilian, they all knew about this. So then I became quickly their agent.
I see.
So I took the interviews for them. I organized the interviews.
Well, how did they feel about that?
My father couldn't care less.
But he was okay to do the interviews. He didn't care about the celebrity, but he
didn't care less about how many likes and, if there were all of a sudden 30,000. I don't think he knew what that meant and he couldn't care less. But funnily enough, he loved the attention, like the being in the camera. Because remember, his dream was to become a pop singer.
Oh.
So he loved the likes, the camera, seeing himself in the video. He loved being in the stage. He loves that. He couldn't care less about how many. I don't think he even know how many 100,000 followers he has.
Wow.
Which is and the funny thing is, for a long time, and I think it's different, he never saw himself, even with the fame, he never saw himself as an artist. He said, why are people liking my work? Because I think in his mind, artist is like someone like Picasso in a museum. And for him, he was just doing some drawings. But nonetheless, that really changed their lives and all of our lives because, he had 4 exhibitions after that. He just published a book in Korea. National Geographic got in touch with us and offered a 10 days cruise expedition to Galapagos. All paid.
Oh my gosh.
They printed 15-page article in the National Geographic Traveler magazine.
So then he drew while he was on expedition, correct?
Yeah, so I told him, he cannot go alone because he does, he's too old and I have to come with them. It sounds like fun, but it's no fun to be stuck with their father, grumpy old father, in a tiny cabin for 10 days.
Wait, did your mom go?
I wanted her to come, but their budget didn't allow for 3 people. I would have loved my mom to come because that would have lessened the burden of,
You're the one saying, now time to draw. Sit
Now
down.
time to draw.
You got to earn this trip.
And the father and son relationship is very complex, and especially, it's my father with me. It's not like a very, we don't talk to each other. He never told me he loved me. It's a typical Korean dad thing.
You know, that is so interesting because you describe him as grumpy and whatnot, but the fact that he's doing this and it's such a family endeavor and this like sense of meaning and direction in his life as well as income that you have provided for him, I mean, it is the most touching story.
Yeah.
And so to hear you say that, I find it so interesting because his Instagram account touches so many people, and it's so warm and evocative.
Yeah.
And he's smiling in most of those pictures.
Yeah, and that's what is so interesting for us too. He is the most docile, caring person for grandkids, but also people outside of family. Within family, he's never talks, only when he drinks a little bit. And I mean, as a son, I have a lot of issues with him because we never. I don't think we ever had a conversation. Like I remember when I'll come to Brazil after semester, he'll come pick it up. If I didn't open my mouth, we will go on that trip to house without one word of dialogue. I have to ask how you're doing, how's the store, then he will respond.
Well, one thing I was so impressed by is you said he went to Seoul National, right? And he didn't raise you like a typical Korean dad, forcing their kids to become.
Exactly.
I find that so rare.
Yeah. Well, because I think he himself was an artist and, his dream is to become a singer. And I think he never fulfilled that dream. And only now at 76, he's having that experience of being in this big, front of a big audience. But he was very progressive, I never experienced homophobia or racism, which is pretty common, I think, from his generation, especially coming from Korea.
Yes.
So it was very liberal. And I think that's the gratitude that I have towards my parents of them having this such an open-minded, and they just trusted me. It's like, okay, you just do whatever you want to do. And with my mom, she was being responsible with that. But sometimes I doubted, like, is it lack of interest in just total lack of interest, or is it still care about me, but he's just not expressing that. So I have issues, with my father, but I hope that through this project we can at least get closer.
I wonder if one of the reasons why your parents are so progressive is that they're not Christian, for one thing.
That's true.
I think that is well.
Yeah. And I mean, what a blessing that you
We're
grew
blessed
up.
that no Christians. We're blessed they're Buddhist.
that you grew up so open-minded. I wonder, what does your dad make of your success? Does he understand it? Did he know? Besides being able to support yourself, did he, before the whole drawings for my grandchildren, did he understand what you were doing here?
I think he understands. We never talked about it. My mom is the proud mom, obviously. Like she's showing off and asking me, "Oh, did you ever? What's the new magazine thing that you appear?" She's very proud. But we never talked about it. I mean, my dad and I, we never have conversation. I'm the one who's pulling teeth out to talk about it. So I really don't know what he thinks, and it's a mystery. I'm sure he knows the success. I support him financially, been for many years. So I think he has both a feeling of gratitude, but also a feeling of guilt because of that. So I think the fact that now with this project he's starting to make money, it's not enough for them to be completely sufficient. But my hope that it's soon enough,
With the
book and exhibitions and being influencers, that the serious money will start coming.
I love how your dad's an influencer.
Yeah, he had
Cool.
sponsored content.
He has sponsored content. There's a major entertainment company in Korea who wants to sign him as like to present him. So I think this is gonna hopefully change, and then hopefully they're gonna be making more money than I am making. but he certainly knows about my success, but we don't talk about it. since we're wrapping up, I wanted to touch on something that I wanna, because I think maybe a lot of young designers or creative are listening to this. Because I also taught many years at Parsons and SVA, and many of them were Korean students who come from Korea. And the thing about the Korean students, they're all really hardworking. They're extremely smart, and they very ambitious. Something happens that either when they go back to Korea or they continue to start their job here, they lose that passion. I just wanted to, once again, share the importance of focusing on that passion. I benefited tremendously from doing this personal project, just trusting myself. And I think I was able to fortunately use the disadvantage of being an immigrant, right? Of the crisis with identity, and dealing with the issues with my family, and turn those into problem solving and turning into personal project. And these things are transformational, not only for career, but also self-fulfillment, for having a confidence, but also, in my case specifically, connecting with my parents and giving. I think the biggest gift that I was able to give more than money is to give them the purpose in life and new career at their age. And it's not because I am creatively ingenious. It really has nothing to do with it. It's about finding the purpose. It's about understanding, in my father's case, really understanding their need and really using the technology at your service to doing something that can change these people's lives. Because I really believe, regardless of your age, where you come from, how much money you have, influence you have, when you have a passion, the tools that you have at your disposal with your phone, you can change the world, you can change anyone's life. And that's really, I would love that to be my end message for the listeners who may have insecurities and who may have dreams that they never fulfilled, that it's never too late. Because I lived it myself, and I lived it through my parents. And I don't come from privileged background nor my parents, but it was all about that passion and how you expressed it and used technology to spread it to people around the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the interview.
I know. I have so many more questions. I don't want to stop.
KPod is a production of KoreanAmericanStory.org. Our producer is Kevin Park. Our editor is AJ Valente, and our executive producer is HJ Lee. You can email us with comments and suggestions at KPod@KoreanAmericanStory.org. You can see Juliana's portraits of our guests and some behind-the-scenes photos at KoreanAmericanStory.org. You can follow Juliana on Instagram at Juliana_Sohn. For news and updates on KPod, follow Korean American Story on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.